Ladies and gentlemen, the captain has turned on the fasten seatbelt sign. If you haven't already done so, please make sure the volume of this podcast is set perfectly to your listening enjoyment. Please take your seat, whether that's on the treadmill, car, sofa, or bed, and buckle in for the last trip. My name is Jamie Beebe, and I'll be your tour guide, recreating someone's last days in paradise. On behalf of myself and everyone behind the scenes, please enjoy the Last Trip podcast. And because nobody likes a long flight to get to where they want to be, let's prepare for takeoff. On June 30th, 2005, a fishing boat called the Freedom left the San Pedro marina for an overnight trip off the coast of Southern California. When it returned, one man never came back. Patrick McDermott, a cameraman, a father, and the former partner of Olivia Newton-John. His car was found parked near the dock. His wallet, passport, and keys were left behind on the boat. But Patrick himself had vanished. The Coast Guard would later say he was likely lost at sea. Yet no body was ever recovered. And over the years, rumors of financial trouble, a possible staged disappearance, and alleged sightings in Mexico have kept this case alive. Let's explore what happened to Patrick McDermott and how someone can disappear without a trace, leaving only questions behind. If you ever find yourself wandering through San Pedro, California, on a salty morning before dawn, you'll notice something almost tactile in the air. A mix of ocean breeze, diesel fuel, and promise. It's the scent of a town that lives and breathes the sea. It's a place where fishing isn't just a hobby, it's heritage. And from here, adventurers of all kinds have launched countless journeys deep into the Pacific. San Pedro sits at the edge of the Los Angeles harbor, a community shaped by shipping, sailors, shipwrights, and sports fishermen. At 22nd Street Landing, a cluster of charter and party boats line the docks, their hulls bobbing gently in the water, ready to carry passengers on short excursions or multi-day offshore trips. From this humble harbor, vessels like the Freedom, an 85-foot sport fishing boat with room for several dozen passengers, push out into the vastness of the Pacific. Nights on board are an invitation to something ancient. The slow drift of water under the keep, the hum of engines, the whisper of wake-meeting waves. Whether you're an experienced angler or someone who just wants to feel the horizon stretch out before you, these overnight trips offer a kind of communion with the ocean that's hard to describe and impossible to forget. One of the most popular destinations for these offshore charters is San Clemente Island, a rugged, windswept stretch of rock sitting about 70 miles off the Southern California coast. Unlike the cozy confines of the harbor, the open water between San Pedro and San Clemente is a different world altogether, wide, wild, and raw. The trip might take several hours, depending on sea conditions and the pace of the vessel. But the reward is well worth it for anglers and ocean lovers alike. San Clemente Island is legendary in sport fishing circles. Around its deep ocean shelves and underwater canyons, species of yellowtail, bluefin tuna, dorado, halibut, and marlin roam. Powerful fish that lure serious anglers year after year. Overnight trips give fishermen the chance not just to chase these trophies, but to witness changing light upon an infinite horizon, to taste the salt in the air as night gives way to dawn, and to know how small we truly are beneath the sky. If overnight sport fishing isn't your rhythm, San Pedro itself has plenty to offer before you ever set foot on a boat. Just minutes from the marina is the historic Cabrillo Beach, where families gather, kids play in the surf, and anglers cast lines from the long fishing pier. A favorite local spot where you don't even need a license to fish from shore. There's also the San Pedro Fish Market, a beloved eatery where the catch of the day becomes a communal feast, and the town's fishing heritage is served up with garlic, shrimp, and salt-kissed laughter. And for anyone fascinated by maritime history, The Los Angeles Maritime Museum offers exhibits that chronicle the harbor's past, from Navy vessels to fishing fleets that once defined the local economy. Perhaps the real draw of a fishing trip from San Pedro isn't just the possibility of landing a prize catch. It's the feeling of entering the unknown. Rolling seas beneath you, wind in your hair, the sun inching up over the water like a promise. You step out of the harbor with land behind you warming in the distance, and you move forward into silence and possibility. For many, that's why they keep coming back. For the camaraderie with the fellow anglers, the quiet moments staring out at open water, and the surge of excitement when a line doubles over with a tug that feels like a heartbeat. It's why fishermen get up before dawn, why they haul in their gear at night, and why, for all the beauty that draws people out, the sea can feel so vast and unknowable. And that is the ocean that Patrick McDermott knew, the same waters that carried him away on a routine overnight trip from San Pedro to San Clemente Island, a trip that should have ended like so many others, and yet became a mystery instead. Before Patrick McDermott became a name attached to theories and headlines, he was a person with a complicated beginning and a life shaped by questions that never fully had answers. Patrick Kim McDermott was born on September 18, 1956, in Seoul, South Korea. According to Patrick himself, he believed he was born to a Korean mother and an American father. A story that, like so many parts of his life, carried both distance and longing. When he was still a baby, his mother placed him up for adoption. By the time he was 2 years old, he was adopted by an American family and brought to the United States. On his adoption paperwork, Patrick's birth name is listed as Kim Chong-nam. It's a name that belonged to a life he would never fully know, a past sealed inside a few lines on a card. Friends later said that Patrick carried quiet curiosity about where he came from. It wasn't something he spoke about often, but it mattered to him. In August of 2000, Olivia Newton-John would eventually even try to help him locate his birth mother in Korea, a deeply personal search that suggests Patrick never stopped wondering who he might have been had things been different. As an adult, Patrick built a life in Los Angeles. He worked as a cameraman and lighting designer, mostly behind the scenes of commercials. He was not interested in fame, despite moving in circles where it was unavoidable. In fact, people who knew him said he actively disliked the Hollywood lifestyle, especially red carpets, attention, and the superficial trappings that came with celebrity. He preferred staying out of the spotlight, quietly doing his work, then disappearing back into his own world. In 1992, Patrick met actress Yvette Nepar. She was about 26 years old at the time, already working steadily in television, while Patrick was in his mid-30s. After just a few months of dating, Yvette became pregnant. They married in early 1992, and their son, Chance McDermott, was born shortly afterward. But the marriage was short-lived. Within a year or two, Patrick and Yvette divorced. Yvette continued working regularly as an actress, appearing on shows like General Hospital, Days of Our Lives, 21 Jump Street, RoboCop, and others. Patrick, meanwhile, struggled to find steady footing. Like many people working behind the scenes in entertainment, employment was inconsistent, and financial stress began to follow him. About 3 years later, in 1996, Patrick met Olivia Newton-John while working on a commercial. At the time, he was working as a lighting designer. Despite coming from very different worlds, the two connected quickly. Their relationship would go on and off, for more than 9 years. It wasn't a traditional Hollywood romance. Olivia spent a great deal of time in Australia, and her career kept her constantly moving. Their relationship ebbed and flowed, sometimes close, sometimes distant. But by all accounts, it was deeply affectionate. Friends described mutual respect and genuine love. Olivia once called Patrick the most romantic person she'd ever met. Even during their periods apart, they remained emotionally connected. But beneath that connection, Patrick's personal struggles continued. In July of 2000, Patrick filed for bankruptcy. The court records show he was more than $31,000 in debt, including over $8,000 in overdue child support owed to his former wife. As a lighting designer, work was sporadic. At times, Patrick relied on disability income. Money was a constant source of stress, and one he didn't hide from people around him. Still, there was one place where Patrick seemed at peace. He loved fishing. Now, at least once a month, Patrick went on overnight fishing trips, often on the same boat with the same crew. It was routine, familiar, comforting. Fishing wasn't just a hobby for him. It was an escape, a place where he wasn't defined by debt, relationships, or unanswered questions about his past. By the summer of 2005, Patrick and Olivia were no longer romantically involved. They'd broken up just a few weeks before his disappearance. Now, when Patrick vanished, it would be 7 full weeks before Olivia released a public statement, expressing concern for her treasured friend. The delay fueled speculation, but it also reflected the complicated, private nature of their relationship at that point in time. And so, Patrick McDermott stepped onto a fishing boat, a place he knew well, doing something he loved, carrying with him a lifetime of layered identity, financial stress, complicated relationships, and quiet longing. What happened next is where certainty ends. Let's dive into what we know about the fishing trip that Patrick went on and the moments that led to his disappearance. On the night of June 30th, 2005, Patrick McDermott did something he had done many times before. He boarded a fishing boat. The boat was called the Freedom, an 85-foot sport fishing vessel that departed from the 22nd Street landing in San Pedro, California. It wasn't enormous. It wasn't a cruise ship or anything close to it. The Freedom had room for 86 bunks, but on this trip, only about 23 passengers were aboard, roughly a third full. Enough people to feel social, but definitely not crowded. Patrick was a frequent client on overnight fishing trips like this. He loved fishing. He went regularly, once a month, sometimes even on this very same boat. The trip was not impulsive. It was not unusual. It didn't raise any red flags at the time. He booked the trip alone. He didn't know the other passengers or the crew, but that wasn't strange either. Fishing trips like this attract solo travelers all the time. People looking for quiet or distraction, or just a long stretch of ocean where nothing else matters. At 10 p.m., the Freedom pulled away from the dock and headed towards San Clemente Island. The ocean was dark. The air was cool. The kind of night where the horizon disappears and the world narrows to the sound of water against steel. By 5 a.m., the boat arrived at the island. Throughout July 1st, the passengers fished all day. According to police, Patrick was seen socializing, talking, fishing alongside others. People remembered him. They remembered conversations. They remembered him being there, present, engaged, and alive. No one described him as upset or withdrawn or behaving strangely. He was just another passenger on a fishing trip. But as the day wore on and the Freedom began its return to shore, the timeline became less certain. Witness accounts conflict in the final stretch of the journey. No one can say with confidence when Patrick was last seen, only that it was sometime in the final 30 minutes before the boat docked back in San Pedro. So let's break it down. Patrick paid his bar and kitchen tab. 2 hot dogs, 1 Coke. Now that matters, because on boats like the Freedom, tabs are settled in the last hour of the trip. Literally when land is already in sight, when daylight is bright, when people are packing up their gear, talking loudly, moving around. Which raises an unsettling question. If Patrick paid his bar tab in the final hour, how did he disappear without anyone noticing? Now, there was no formal head count when the passengers disembarked. That alone feels shocking in hindsight. But even without a head count, it would have been extremely difficult for someone to fall off an 85-foot boat in broad daylight, surrounded by other passengers, without a single person seeing or hearing anything. And yet, no one did. No one saw or heard a thing. Some witnesses later told police they thought they saw Patrick get off the boat and walk toward the parking lot, but they couldn't be sure. Disembarking is chaotic. People are tired, focused on getting to their cars, their own conversations, and back to their own lives. No one was watching closely. Patrick's absence went unnoticed. Not for hours, not for a day, but for nearly a week. It wasn't until July 6th, 2005, when Patrick failed to show up for a family event, that concern began to build. Then came something even more alarming. He missed a scheduled visit with his 13-year-old son, Chance. That's when his ex-wife realized something was very wrong. She called the operator of the Freedom and asked a simple question. Was Patrick McDermott on your boat? The answer was yes. His name was on the manifest. Then the operator remembered something else. A tackle box had been found on board. Inside it was Patrick's fishing license. His ex-wife asked about Patrick's fanny pack, and the operator located that as well. Inside, they found Patrick's wallet, sitting right on top, his car keys, other personal items. When the wallet was opened, Patrick's driver's license was inside. Then she described Patrick's car. The operator stepped outside, and there it was, still parked near the marina. And that's when the weight of it hit. Patrick hadn't gone anywhere. The operator contacted the police, then the Coast Guard. He told them there was a potential problem. And Patrick McDermott was officially reported missing on July 11th, 2005. Despite the strange circumstances, the story didn't receive widespread media attention until nearly a month later, leaving crucial early days lost to time, tides, and unanswered questions. At the time of Patrick's disappearance, Olivia Newton-John was at a spa retreat in Australia. She declined to comment publicly on his whereabouts, fueling speculation. Though, privately, she was dealing with the shock of losing someone she still deeply cared about. Years later, Olivia would say the mystery was hard to accept. She often wondered what happened. 3 years after his disappearance, she fell in love with John Easterling during a trip to the Amazon, later saying he helped her move forward after the trauma of endless rumors claiming Patrick had staged his death and was living in Mexico. Olivia Newton-John passed away on August 8, 2022, at the age of 73, after several battles with breast cancer. And Patrick McDermott? Well, he remains exactly where he was left that day, suspended between land and sea. Because between witness accounts and silence, between what should have been an ordinary fishing trip, was a disappearance no one can fully explain. Let's cover a couple theories about what may have happened. When someone disappears without a trace, the silence doesn't stay empty for long. It's filled with theories. In Patrick McDermott's case, the absence of answers created a vacuum. And over time, that vacuum hardened into two competing narratives. Two explanations that could not be more different. One rooted in tragedy, the other in intention. One of the most grounded explanations for what happened to Patrick is that he didn't wind up anywhere at all. That he was lost to the ocean, swallowed whole in a moment no one saw, couldn't see, and couldn't prevent. In 2008, the United States Coast Guard brought formal closure to its long investigation into his disappearance. The investigation had gone on for years, looking into every angle: criminal action, intentional disappearance, suicide, accident, even a staged hoax. But when the Coast Guard closed its case and the follow-up marine safety investigation was wrapped, the conclusion was clear in its restraint. They found no evidence of foul play, no signs of suicide, no proof of a hoax, and no sign of criminal action. What their investigation ultimately suggested, based on all available evidence, is that Patrick McDermott was lost at sea. Now, that conclusion, clinical in wording, emotional in weight, leaves us with silence and possibility, both of which are enormous. Now, on that fishing trip, the ocean was just another backdrop. Dark water at night, familiar currents by day, the same sea Patrick had stood beside countless times on monthly excursions. But the ocean, for all its routine rhythms, is living and unpredictable. It can be deceptive in its calm and sudden in its fury. Even in conditions that seem benign, a momentary slip, a misstep, a loss of balance, or a sudden wave bruising against a rail can send someone over the side in an instant. Without a cry, without a splash anyone remembers. We imagine him that night, or that morning, leaning on a rail, looking out at sea, perhaps tired from fishing, perhaps thinking of home or the unresolved parts of his life. A quiet deck amidst other voices. And then, nothing. No witness, no sound that registered with the dozen or more passengers who later said they couldn't pinpoint the last time they saw him. People forget how easily the ocean conceals a moment. Waves can absorb sound, distance can blur sightlines, even a well-lit deck beneath the sun can hold blind spots. Shadows, where a body could slip unnoticed. Especially when dozens of other distractions fill the air. Laughter, conversation, packed gear, people talking about their day. The Coast Guard's conclusions were not about speculation. They were rooted in what was not found. No witness account of violence, no struggles, no argument, no indication that anyone pushed him, no sign of a planned departure from the boat. The absence of evidence of foul play or intent isn't just what was reported. It's what wasn't reported by anyone aboard. Nothing suggested unusual behavior. Nothing pointed to trouble. Just routine. Just a day of fishing and camaraderie. We think about Patrick, a man who loved the sea, who willingly spent countless nights on boats, who found peace in the rhythm of the water. And we wonder, did the sea that once brought him solace become the very place where he slipped beyond the reach? That's the essence of this theory. Not drama, not conspiracy, not sensationalism, but a simple, heartbreaking possibility. Patrick McDermott walked the deck and the ocean claimed him. A moment unseen, an answer unfound, a life carried out into the vast blue until nothing remained that we could hold on to. And in that possibility, there is an unvarnished human truth. Sometimes the world is indifferent, and sometimes that is the hardest thing to accept. But that is what his loved ones have accepted. And what about the rumors that continued? Because if the ocean didn't take Patrick McDermott, then the only other explanation left is far more unsettling. That he walked away. That he didn't vanish by accident, but by design. Almost from the moment Patrick was reported missing, whispers began to circulate that this wasn't a tragedy at sea, but a carefully orchestrated disappearance. The theory gained enough traction that his case was eventually featured on America's Most Wanted, placing Patrick in a category usually reserved for fugitives, not missing fishermen. And then, in 2009, the speculation exploded into the mainstream. Dateline NBC aired an episode dedicated entirely to the question, was Patrick McDermott still alive? The show hired private investigators and sent them undercover to Mexico, where they believed Patrick might be hiding. Now, their theory was simple and, on its face, compelling. Patrick disappeared to escape his financial problems. Remember the roughly $8,000 in back child support owed to his ex-wife, and a total debt load estimated around $40,000. But here's where the story immediately splits. Because $40,000, while stressful, while overwhelming to many, is not an extraordinary amount of debt. It's not the kind of money most people would trade their entire identity for, their child, their family, their past. Starting over from scratch, especially in another country, would almost certainly cost as much, if not more, than the debt itself. That contradiction sits at the heart of this theory. Still, Dateline's investigators pressed forward. They created a website called findpatrickmcdermott.com, not as a public service, but as a digital trap. Every visitor's IP address was logged, mapped, and monitored. The idea that if Patrick was alive, curious, and trying to stay ahead of the story, he might check the site himself. And according to investigators, that's exactly what happened. Within an hour of launching the site, they reported hundreds of hits, many originating from the same IP address in Mexico. Others came from anonymous users claiming they had seen Patrick throughout Mexico and Central America. More than 20 alleged sightings in total. By early 2009, Dateline investigators publicly claimed they believed Patrick was alive, living quietly on or near the water off the west coast of Mexico and asking to be left alone. Then came a statement that added even more fuel to an already volatile fire. In April of 2009, private investigator Philip Klein, who had been hired by Dateline, released a public announcement saying his firm had received a fax from a small city near Acapulco. Philip claimed the fax led them to a credible representative speaking on Patrick's behalf, and that they were now in contact and in negotiations. The language here was vague, careful, almost theatrical. Philip asked the media and the public to remember there was a young man out there who deserved answers about why his father disappeared. But despite the dramatic announcement, no proof was ever released. No photo, no recorded voice, no verified contact with Patrick himself. The investigation continued quietly, and by 2010, private investigators claimed they had narrowed Patrick's location to Sayulita, Mexico, a small coastal town known for its expatriate community. According to the theory, Patrick was living under his birth name, Pat Kim, blending in among foreigners who worked as deckhands on mega yachts owned by wealthy businessmen. That's a story that sounds plausible. Sayulita is the kind of place where someone could disappear into plain sight, where reinvention isn't unusual, and where people don't ask many questions. But again, sounds like and proof are not the same thing. In 2016, an Australian magazine, Woman's Day, claimed Patrick was alive and living in Sayulita with a German girlfriend. They even published a photograph of a man who looked strikingly like him. But within days, the story unraveled. The man in the photo was identified as Wes Staub, a Canadian tourist, photographed alongside his wife while vacationing in Sayulita. The resemblance was a coincidence, and the claim collapsed. And that pattern repeats again and again in this theory. Claims citing conviction, but never confirmation. Philip Klein later suggested Patrick may have staged his disappearance so his son could eventually collect on a $100,000 life insurance policy. A suggestion that raises uncomfortable ethical questions. Because if true, it would mean Patrick willingly allowed his child to believe he was dead, to grieve him, to grow up without answers. For some people, the idea that Patrick faked his own death is irresistible. It offers control, agency, a clean narrative. It turns an unknowable tragedy into a story with intention. But here's the reality, and it matters. There is no verified evidence that Patrick McDermott is alive. No documentation, no confirmed sightings, no DNA, no financial trail, no communication directly from him. And despite years of investigation, even the U.S. Coast Guard, after examining all angles, including hoax and intentional disappearance, found no evidence to support the idea that Patrick staged his death. So where does that leave us? With a theory that is dramatic, persistent, and endlessly repeated, but never substantiated, and with a man who boarded a fishing boat and never came home. All we truly know is this: Patrick McDermott disappeared, and the ocean gave no answers. Everything else, every sighting, every claim, every headline, lives in the space between grief and imagination. And sometimes the hardest mystery to accept is the one that refuses to resolve. Usually at this point in the episode, we dive into some safety tips. But let's change things up a bit today. Now, how easy is it to fake your own death and start over? Imagine wanting to disappear so completely that the world believes you are gone. So gone that your old life becomes a story others tell, not a burden you carry. It's a fantasy that has drawn people for centuries, romanticized in novels, whispered in online forums, dramatized in movies. But in real life, well, the idea of faking your own death and starting over in another country is a labyrinth of legal danger, logistical nightmares, and emotional wreckage that almost no one escapes untouched. At its heart, faking your own death, called pseudocide, is not a singular act. It requires a cascade of deception. Convincing authorities you're gone, vanishing without a trace, assuming a new identity, and then surviving in a world that constantly asks for paperwork, names, faces, fingerprints, and histories. With digital surveillance, biometric passports, global data sharing, and cross-border law enforcement cooperation, the myth of walking away clean has never been harder to sustain. Let's break it down, not as a how-to, but as a what would it really take. To begin with, you need a death. Though that means creating a believable scenario where your disappearance isn't unusual. A car found at the bottom of a ravine, a body lost at sea, a hiking accident with no body recovered. Writers and internet forums throw around wild ideas. Everything from burning a corpse beyond recognition to faking a boating accident with staged DNA evidence. But these are fantasies, not viable strategies. Then comes identity. Now, governments don't hand out new legal names to fugitives. You don't walk into an office and ask for a fresh start. Any legitimate identity, passport, driver's license, social security number, ties to databases that talk to each other. In the US, for example, death records are flagged across agencies. A legally declared death means your old identity is essentially sealed, not replaced. So people who do try it must decide. Live entirely off-grid with no employment, no financial records, no legitimate documentation, or create false identity documents. And that step itself requires fraud, forged passports, fake visas, stolen identities, illicit networks. Governments around the world classify identity fraud, document forgery, and obstruction of justice as serious crimes, often punishable with years in prison and heavy fines. Real cases illustrate just how hard fantasy collides with reality. Take John Darwin, known in Britain as the Canoe Man. In 2002, he staged a drowning accident and lived for years under a false identity in Panama with his wife. Now, it seemed clever until a photo surfaced online that Interpol's facial recognition systems matched back to him. He was arrested and sentenced to prison for fraud. Or look at Ryan Borgwart. I covered his case in episode 59. He was a Wisconsin man who faked his own drowning to be with a woman he met online. Now, that ruse lasted only 89 days before law enforcement caught up with him. He was sentenced to jail time and ordered to pay tens of thousands in restitution. And then there's Nicholas Alaverdian, known as Nicholas Rossi, who staged his own death and fled overseas under a false identity. He was ultimately found, arrested in a hospital in Scotland, and extradited back to the US, where he faced justice. Now, these are not fringe cases. They're cautionary tales, vivid reminders that hiding forever is not only difficult, it's often temporary. Modern tools like facial recognition, international watch lists, biometric passports, cross-border communication, make disappearing now far more complicated than it was even a decade ago. And then there's the emotional toll. Faking your own death doesn't just break laws, it shatters lives. Partners, children, siblings, friends, all of them are left to grieve, to search, to question, and to hope. Even if it's technically possible to slip into the background somewhere, the cost is always human. Families are left without closure, burdened by unanswered questions that might never be resolved. So could someone really fake their own death and live somewhere else undetected? Well, in isolated pockets of the world, it's technically imaginable, but not in the thorough, glamorous way fiction often portrays. Without financial resources, fake documents, and a willingness to exist outside society's instructions, someone could perhaps live anonymously, but not living a new life in a developed society where you need ID to rent a home, to work, to open a bank account, or to access basic services. And even if someone managed to slip under the radar initially, digital echoes, credit reports, travel records, biometric checks make long-term disappearance nearly impossible in our connected world. So when we hear stories like Patrick McDermott's, or the rumors that he might have escaped to Mexico, it's important to separate desire from likelihood. Yes, people have tried to fake their own deaths. Yes, some have disappeared for a time. But for most people, in most places, forever is a very long time. And the world today simply doesn't let people vanish that easily. The fantasy of disappearing may stir something deep in all of us, a yearning for escape, freedom, reinvention. But the real world doesn't offer clean breaks. It offers consequences, accountability, and the impossible paradox that no matter how far you go, your past tends to follow. Patrick McDermott was 48 years old when he disappeared. He stood 5'9", weighed about 140 pounds, with brown eyes and salt and pepper hair. Details that now read less like a description and more like a quiet reminder that this wasn't just a mystery. This was a person, a father, a son, someone who boarded a fishing boat expecting to come home. Nearly 2 decades later, the theories still compete for space. Accident, intention, escape, tragedy. Each one tries to fill the same empty space left behind by unanswered questions. And maybe that's human nature. When there are no answers, the mind keeps searching for them. But there are real people living with the weight of that search. Patrick's ex-wife, Yvette, the mother of his son, has long asked for the speculation to end. Not for herself, but for their child. Because every theory, every headline, every recycled rumor reopens a wound that never truly healed. Olivia Newton-John, who loved Patrick deeply in her own way, once said something that feels especially true here. That it's human to ask more questions when there are no answers. But at some point, acceptance becomes necessary in order to move forward. And that doesn't mean forgetting. It means holding space for uncertainty without letting it consume the living. If you or someone you know has new, credible information about the disappearance of Patrick McDermott, the case remains open. Tips can be left with the Coast Guard Investigative Service at 310-521-4296. Messages should include detailed callback information. Until then, Patrick McDermott remains suspended between land and sea, between what might have been and what will never be fully known. And sometimes, the hardest part of a mystery isn't solving it. It's learning how to live with the silence it leaves behind. And finally, remember to leave a review and rate this podcast 5 stars if you like the show, or hell, even if you don't. But either way, feel free to let me know what you think. Please follow The Last Trip on Instagram at The Last Trip Crime Pod, and subscribe on Patreon to support the show. You'll get extra research, videos, photos, and updates, and even learn more about my personal travels. That's patreon.com/thelasttrippodcast. I'm Jamie Beebe, bringing you your last trip and signing off until the next one. Thanks for listening.